Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about Grand Cathay in patch 8.0. And what I want to talk about in this video are the kind of changes that I feel Creative Assembly should have implemented for Grand Cathay with the Tiger Warriors DLC. Don't get me wrong, Bashiva has a wonderful skill line and absolutely her campaign is markedly different than the other Cathayan campaigns in the game. But at the same time, there are things that Creative Assembly should have done for Cathay as a whole in order to improve the game experience. One really big point, I would dare say, is that they should have made the campaign experience for the other Cathayan campaigns, be it Yanbo, Xiaoming, Miaoying, different than where they are before. Because this is actually a pretty big point, that kind of variety of a campaign. You look at the Empire. Karl Franz and Elspeth, even though they start next to each other, they do play in markedly different ways. That's because of the faction mechanics, and definitely different than Gelt. It's not just a question of starting position, it's also a question of those mechanics. Whereas with Miao Ying and Xiao Ming, they don't have unique campaign mechanics, and even though Yan Bo does have one, it still feels like playing the same campaign with just the addition of jungle warfare. So it's a combination of, starting position, campaign dynamics, as well as unique mechanics, right, to deal with in a campaign. Like Xiao Ming should be maybe about diplomacy with ogres and various trade deals around the world. That is reflected in his caravans, but definitely he doesn't play differently than Miao Ying, because you still have to care about the bastion, you still have to build that up, you still have to keep chaos at bay, you're still dealing with the same foes. And that is a pretty big point, because if you look at Dwarven campaigns, if you look at High Elven campaigns even, yes, there is Ulthuan, yes, you'll eventually fight Dark Elves, but the experience of gang there is different. Whereas in a Cathayan campaign, it's kind of the same thing, unless you're playing Bashiva, which is like you deal with Snitch, you secure the Great Bastion, you win, and there's not necessarily a marked difference between those campaigns, really. It does also have to do with the climate situation in a campaign, where you have temperate savanna and desert for Xiaoming and Miaoying. Yan Bo only gets jungle, which is not an ideal circumstance. And again, I have to compare it to the situation of Karl Franz. I forgot to enable Toggle Flag of War, but think of a Karl Franz campaign versus an Elspeth campaign. If you're playing an Elspeth campaign, usually you're going to deal with Sylvania. That's your main goal, and then deal with other things. Whereas with the Karl Franz campaign, you got Kemmler, you got Beastman, you got Festus, you got Bretonia, if you want to deal with that. So the campaign experience just between those two campaigns is markedly different, and definitely so between those two campaigns and Gelt's campaign as well, especially because of the choice that Gelt does have. That, by the way, Yan Bo doesn't have. Like, I think it would be a much more interesting campaign if he actually started in Cathay in itself. So that's the first part, the differentiation between the different campaign experiences that we do have in Warhammer 3 for Grand Cathay. It's quite a shame, because Cathay could be a very interesting race, and Cathay as a location on the campaign map is pretty interesting, but playing 3 different campaigns and ending up in pretty much the exact same position does kind of screw over replayability from my view. So that's the first point. The second point has to do with Cathay's structures, their buildings, really. And this is where reworks have done a pretty good job in general, changing unit tiers, changing economic buildings, giving you that kind of variety. And this is where I think Cathay falters. The whole yin-yang balancing system doesn't end up necessarily working so well from my perspective. Yes, you can focus on yin, get a bit of yin, get 3 to 5 yin, reduce construction time, but that's kind of the thing. This is supposed to be a system about balancing various factors, but you're pretty much in a situation where you either go for perfect harmony, balance harmony, which gives you that campaign movement range, upkeep benefit, an income from all buildings, or you go with yin. Very rarely do you have a benefit for going with yang because the recruitment capacity and recruitment cost is not strictly worth it. A lot, or rarely worth it, especially at the cost of increasing construction time in your province. I suppose the idea is that you want to balance it out, but balancing it out is not difficult. It's not an involved choice in your campaign. So that really does have to do with the way they design buildings, the building slots, the settlements themselves, how many building slots they have. Like Nantgau is especially a bad location because it's just a regular settlement that you have to deal with, and maybe it should not be just a regular settlement. Maybe it should have more building slots. But yeah, the design in itself of the buildings that you have, like the economic buildings, like you get under 125 income or you go for 150, and usually it's worth it to go for the yang benefit more than the trade tariff benefit. So it's like, you're supposed to have these choices in a campaign, but a lot of the time they kind of feel meaningless. It's like, what are you going to choose? I mean, yes, there are some benefits here and there, really, with some minor stuff, like, reducing construction costs with a lumber mill, but then you consider the fact that if you go with yin, again, you reduce construction costs. So it's like the idea of a balancing act between yin and yang just doesn't really work out. And I don't think it's ever really worked out in a Cathayan campaign, this idea that, oh, you want to balance things out. It certainly is not as annoying as you used to be, where you would have to balance out heroes and lords. But I think that what they did with Shadows of Change is not what they should have stuck with in a campaign as Grand Cathay. So that's the second point, really, the building slots. It's not fun building an empire as Cathay, largely because when you capture a territory, the first thing you kind of feel is a level of annoyance, because usually you're going to capture with yin and yang, and on the front line especially, you're going to want that campaign movement range and that upkeep benefit. Also, it's just a balancing aspect, really, thinking about it, because you do a lot with that 25% upkeep for armies and provinces. Cathay doesn't have a lot of economic potential in terms of like how much money their settlements are going to deliver, with exception on Bow with commercial districts. But they do reduce upkeep by such a ridiculous amount through various sources that you end up in that kind of position where your armies are pretty damn dirt cheap in a lot of ways when you're thinking about, the harmony situation. Not an ideal outcome from my view. And then there's the final point, the third really big point from my view. Like, we could talk about how the caravan system could have been improved by creative assembly. Like, you compare the Cathayan caravans to the Kastorf caravans. When you fight a battle in a Kastorf campaign with the caravans, it feels actually interesting. Because, one, you don't have a lot of battles. Certainly you don't have those minor irrelevant ogre armies spawning to deal with, or very, very rarely do you actually deal with ogres as Kastorfs. Whereas Cathay, you deal with those bastards all the damn time. And that's not an ideal circumstance. I think the entire idea of the caravan system didn't necessarily deliver in the way that Creative Assembly had wanted it to. Then we can talk about how the whooshing compass is rather pointless, because until you have a casualty replenishment hero, you're almost always going to go for Great Bastion. Then once you do have those casualty replenishment heroes, you're just going to keep Celestial Lake all the time, unless you're playing on Bow, who is just going to go for Nongchang Basin. But that's, caravans and the whooshing compass, yes, those systems could have been better. The Bastion system itself could have been better. There's all these kind of minor things that add up for Cathay. But I would say one of the bigger aspects of Cathay, one of the bigger problems, is the lack of practical unit variety and hero variety in their campaigns. Like, don't get me wrong, Cathay has a wonderful unit roster. You look at things like Celestial Dragon Guard, Terracotta Sentinels, you consider Sky Junks, their Fire Rain Rockets, their gunpowder units, their melee units, their monstrous units. Like, they have a bit of everything. They have flying units, they have ranged units, they have melee units, they have crossbow units, gunpowder units, cavalry even. And J Lancers, well, they're not the best cavalry in the world, they do get the job done. I mean, they're not going to compete with Bretonnia or the Empire in terms of cavalry potential, but they're certainly going to be able to hold their own, especially when you consider Celestial Alliance. But here's the big problem. From a practical standpoint, given the fact that when you're playing a Fang campaign, and again, it can be Miao Ying, Xiao Ming, Yan Bo, Bashiva is a bit of an exception, but she kind of ends up falling in the same trap to some extent. Less so. But the problem is, you have this so-called unit variety, but you're almost never going to use it. Tiger Warriors DLC did add Tiger Warriors as units. Absolutely. But outside of just adding another melee unit to the roster, you do end up lacking actual variety, because just spamming Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen is really just the best possible option, especially against the kind of early game threats that you're dealing with. I would say what they could have done here is they could have introduced an upgrade system for Jade Warriors, like, you know, being able to make your Jade Warriors, like, Warband upgrade system would have been great, like, you know, giving your ability to take Jade Warriors, making them into Jade Lancers, maybe Celestial Dragon Guard even, eventually, with maybe some research. I think the Warband upgrade system is something that Creative Assembly really should have used more, because I think it's a really great system, and it just makes sense, like, you know, just give a guy a shield if he earns a couple ranks, maybe you sacrifice some ranks, maybe you spend some money. You kind of end up in this ridiculous situation where you end up spamming Jade Warriors and Jade Warrior Crossbowmen and dominating everything in your path. And here's the thing. By the time you actually do unlock your heroes and different units, by the time, you know, you unlock things like Iron Claw, Tiger Warriors, or Celestial Dragon Guard, or even tier 3 units like Jet Lions, J Lions, or, you know, Halberdiers, your campaign is in effect going to be over a lot of times, or you're going to be in such a position that you're not going to risk anything. So the question is, what's the value of having such a diverse unit roster that, for the record, can be really fun to actually play with in battle if you're not really incentivized to use it? I mean, if we consider the Empire, let me just give you an idea. What makes a good race fun to play in terms of variety? Think of the Empire, think of the dwarves, right? You think of the dwarves, you have Quarrelers, you have Dwarf Warriors, you have Iron Drakes. Some people do have an issue with Iron Drakes being tier 2, I don't, I think. Like, because they're specialized units, you know. You have Gunpowder units, Artillery, different melee units, like you can go Slayers if you want to. Personally, I wouldn't, unless I'm playing Ungrim, and even then there's a discussion I have, but a good amount of variety between ranged units, Gunpowder units, Artillery, and Gyrocopters. And that's just the early game of the dwarves. And yes, you have cavalry as Cathay, but you're almost never going to want to go with J-Lancers, especially because, you know, you have to try and balance that harmony out or push the yin situation very hard. Like, I almost never recruit J-Lancers in a Cathayan campaign just because what's the point? I think it's better with Bashiva in terms of unit recruitment, because she gets Jade Warrior Crossbow at tier 1, and Jade Warriors with Halberd at tier 2. I think it would have been better to have heroes recruitable at tier 2, the way the Empire works, the way the dwarves work, because that's what really adds to the variety that those campaigns end up having. Because when you're playing an Empire campaign, you have different schools of magic, you have many different heroes. Like, what are you gonna get, right? Like, with the exception of the melee situation, which is not ideal for an Empire, just consider the variety of choice. Like, do you want to go with a Gunpowder army early on in your campaign? Do you want to go with a Crossbowman army, you know, Archer army, Crossbowman army, or you can go into Huntsman? Do you want to go with the Outriders and Pistoliers and maybe, you know, even get War Wagons? Those are genuine choices you do have in an Empire campaign. The choices exist in theory in a campaign for Cathay, but because of the unit tiers, recruitment tiers, you're almost never going to use them. Whereas in an Empire campaign, the only units that are really difficult to get are steam tanks and land ships, whereas everything else is certainly accessible enough. or at least the core army roster is available at the point where it actually matters. Don't even get me started on Kislev. Like, for instance, you know, you look at armor Kossars, regular Kislevite warriors, regular Kossars, Streltsy, Akshinas, war sleds. You know, one of the units I like the most is Froststorm because you can recruit that at tier 3 and it's pretty damn strong. Having that variety and having something to spend the money that you'll gain, because you'll be gaining a lot for the battles you're fighting, does make for a better campaign. And those are the kind of things that I think Creative Assembly should have really tackled with the Tiger Warriors DLC and patch 8.0. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.